Hiya, can you hear me?
Yeah. What should we say? Because we are live on YouTube.
Okay, I'm just going to put my lipstick on.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh, it was next to me all along.
Hi.
Hey, you alright?
Yes. Get out! Get out my kitchen. That's mine anyway, that deodorant.
Who's that, Sarah?
Andrew.
Is he nicking your deodorant?
He's just taken my deodorant. Yeah, now I know where it's going. He smells lovely, but it's not his.
Got to share these times.
No, just
Right. Remote control.
my hands are freezing. What's her name? Kate Garraway drinks coffee on Good Morning Britain.
I've got
really
tea.
Cozy. I've got haven't got my wine and gin mug.
I've got my K mug.
Oh, nice.
Oh, just to let you know as well, we are live now on YouTube.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I know.
I did say. Yeah, there's no other way of stopping the live feed.
Lovely.
That's all right.
So I think we're nearly there. How many minutes to go?
10.
Oh, there is, isn't there? Jeez.
Yeah. So do you think
I'll disappear for 5 minutes, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Bye. Karen, I'll just give you a quick bell.
I'll mute it. I'll mute everyone. I'll mute you all.
Unmute us all and then what, we just stay in here? Cool.
I'll mute you all. And then you can just crack on and do whatever you do for 5 minutes. Oh, say you should be able to flick your camera off, love.
How do I do that?
At the bottom on your controls, click on your face and then go to the right hand side of it. It should show stop your camera.
Stop video.
Yeah. Just click. There you go. You're off video now.
Lovely.
And I've muted you all as well. Well, I've
Thank
muted
you.
Karen. I'll mute you now.
Hello.
Hi, I'm muted now, 2 minutes, and then we'll go out. Or else, let's see, I'll start broadcasting.
Hold on 1 sec.
You put lipstick on, Karen?
Yeah, do you want some?
No, thanks.
My sister's new company, her other one, Tropic.
It's advertising there.
I know, to no one.
I use that.
Do you? My sister's bought into the business or whatever it is. Is it nice?
Yeah, lovely. I should bring my Wurkplace mug next time.
Oh, I know.
Yes.
We do.
Yes, Sarah, yes. Yes.
Trying to cover my fridge. No. Yeah. Yes, there was snap.
Okay. I'm gonna click on. What time do you have it? Your end?
9:59.
Can you see me?
I can see you. Yes. Be fine. I can see everybody. 30 seconds. Okay, so broadcast. Okay, so now broadcasting to all. Just wait for participants to log in. Couple of minutes.
Sorry.
Okay, we'll just wait for Sarah to be back. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks all for tuning in to this live update on the 23rd of April. What we're going to do today is just go over, maybe we'll have a little introduction from Sarah and a little recap, basically, of what's been going on so far. Sarah, can you give us a little recap on where we are now?
Yeah, of course. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for the text. Mark McManus from Stable Altron. I am now live. Okay, so recap of where we are now. Let's go back to the beginning. So following the reports of the spread of COVID-19, back on the 11th of March, which seems like so long ago now, the government announced on the 11th of March they would reimburse small employers with less than 250 employees any statutory sick pay that they paid to employees for the first 14 days of sickness. So that was the start of the government intervention and support, if you like, based on coronavirus. Employees at the time were advised to self-isolate had they recently returned from one of the affected countries or come into close contact with an individual who'd returned or were demonstrating, displaying symptoms of COVID-19 themselves. At this stage, if a company needed to close down or their business, they would have to lay off their employees if the contract allowed, or if they were sending them home, they had to pay them full pay for the period of the close down. And this was causing organisations across the UK concern, because they were taking a downturn in terms of their takings, their incomings, but they were still having to pay their staff.
Okay.
So on the 20th of March, the government announced the introduction of the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, now known as the CJRS, which was a temporary scheme which opened on the 1st of March, which would allow the subsidised payment to staff. So therefore, staff would stay employed and the government would support through grants the payment of those staff. Now, since we last held our webinar on the 2nd of April, the government have updated their guidance 4 times, with the most recent being on the 15th. And there's been a further statement from the Treasury on the 17th of April, and the portal opened on the 20th. So things are moving really, really quickly, and they are changing all the time.
Okay. Can you tell us a bit more then about the updates, please, sir?
Yeah, sure. So on the 17th of April, the HM Treasury announced that the CJRS will be extended to the end of June. So that was one of the most significant announcements. And one of the main changes in that previously, the golden date was the 28th of February 2020. In the update on the 15th, this has been amended to the 19th of March 2020. So therefore, to access the scheme, an employer must have had the PAYE system in place on or before the 19th of March, so the new golden date, and an affected worker must have been on the payroll on or before the 19th of March 2020. But do note that you can only claim for furloughed employees that were on your payroll on or before the 19th of March and which were notified to HMRC on an RTI submission on or before the 19th of March.
Okay.
Okay. Now, employees that were employed as of the 28th of February and on payroll and were made redundant or stopped working for the employer after that and prior to the 19th of March can qualify for the scheme if the employer re-employs them and puts them on furlough. So again, we spoke about that last time on the 2nd of April, but that just tells us a bit more about the date of the 19th of March and how that affects them. And I think really, really important, as always, to remind employers that employees can be on any type of employment contract, whether it be full-time, part-time, agency, flexible or 0 hour. And one of the key updates again that came through on the latest guidance is that foreign nationals are eligible to be furloughed, and you can furlough employees on all categories of visa. So there's some of the latest updates.
So what if an employee then is on unpaid leave?
Okay, so if an employee started unpaid leave after the 28th of February, you can put them on furlough instead, because that would have been around the time that the furlough scheme started to be discussed and rolled out. If you put them on furlough, then you have to obviously pay them 80% of the regular wages up to £2,500. What that's saying is that if an employee went on unpaid leave on or before the 28th of February, you can't furlough them until the date on which it was agreed they would return from unpaid leave. So that 28th of February date comes into force with unpaid leave.
Right.
Okay so far.
Yep, we're up with that.
Okay, you're okay with this? So let's move on to sickness and furlough then, because again, there's been slightly more clarity around this. So if your employee is self-isolating or on sick leave, as we know, if your employee is on sick leave or self-isolating as a result of COVID-19, they're eligible to get SSP if they're eligible with the usual conditions. The Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme is not intended for short-term absence due to sickness, and the 3-week minimum furlough period tells us that.
Okay.
Short-term illness and self-isolation should not be a consideration in deciding whether to furlough an employee. However, and this is a huge however for employers, if an employer wants to furlough an employee for business reasons and they're currently off sick, so they don't have the work for them, and had they not been off sick, they'd have been in work, they are eligible to do so, as with other employees. So in these cases, the employer should no longer receive statutory sick pay and will be classified as a furloughed employee. As we know, because we discussed this last time, employers are entitled to furlough employees who are being shielded or off on long-term sick. and it's up to employers to decide whether to furlough these employees or not. You can claim both back through the CJRS and the SSP rebate scheme, but what you can't do is claim both of those grants at the same time.
Right.
So I think the key thing here is when an employee is on furlough, you can only reclaim through the coronavirus job retention scheme and not the SSP rebate scheme. It's one or the other.
So one or the other. Right. What if your employee becomes sick then whilst furloughed?
Okay, so furloughed employees retain their statutory rights, so including their right to statutory sick pay. This means that furloughed employees who become ill must be paid at least statutory sick pay. But again, as stated just now, it is up to the employers to decide whether to move them onto SSP or to keep them on furlough at their furloughed rate. What it tells us is that employees are free to switch employees from sick pay to furlough and vice versa, but they shouldn't be abusing the furlough to top up small amounts of SSP for short-term absence. So basically,
Right.
you either choose to furlough somebody for longer than 3 weeks minimum, or if it's a shorter period, they're on SSP.
So is the scheme then limited to employees who otherwise would have been made redundant or laid off?
It's a really good question, because at the beginning, when we first started to talk about the scheme, it was indicated that it was for businesses that would have made their employees redundant or would have laid off their employees should the contract have allowed. The most recent guidance now says that the scheme is not limited to those employees who would otherwise be made redundant. It states that it applies to those who are furloughed by reason of circumstances as a result of coronavirus or the coronavirus disease. So it's slightly broader.
Right.
It's anybody that is impacted.
Do you have some examples?
Yeah, so the first example I can think of that comes to mind is the shielding example. So employees are unable to work because they're shielding in line with public health guidance. So this can also include the 12-week letter that a lot of people have been receiving, or need to stay at home with someone who's shielding can be furloughed. So if you have somebody within your business that is furloughed due to shielding of themselves or shielding somebody within their home, they can be furloughed, which is a move forward. The other one that comes to mind is the care and responsibilities. So it does state in the guidance now that employees who are unable to work because they have care and responsibilities resulting from COVID-19 can be furloughed. So for example, if they need to look after children, they can be furloughed. Now, again, these are employer decisions. But what it's saying is that you can furlough these employees and you won't be challenged when claiming the money back if this was your reason for furlough.
Okay, super. Are there any other changes that we should be aware of?
Okay, so there has been an update with regard to TUPE, which is the Transfer of Undertaking Protection of Employment.
Okay.
We've been having quite a number of queries from our clients around this, certainly ones that are going through the process at present. And what the new guidance tells us is that a new employer is eligible to claim under the CJRS in respect of the employees of a previous business transferred after the 19th of March. If either the TUPE or the PAYE business succession rules apply to the change in ownership. So it's saying that if you have an employee that's transferred over to your business from a previous business, their continuous employment date stands. They will have been employed prior to that date, so you are able to claim for those people. Okay.
So what about overtime and fees? How can this be included in regular payments then? So, okay, so can the overtime, any overtime fees and that be included?
Yeah, so again, this is another U-turn. So when the guidance first came out and we did our webinar on the 2nd of April, it clearly stated that overtime and commission shouldn't be included in any claims that were made through the portal. However, what this now states is you can claim for any regular payments you are obliged to pay your employees, and this includes wages, past overtime fees and compulsory commission payments. What it does say is that discretionary bonuses, including tips and discretionary commission payments and non-cash payments, should be excluded. So that is quite a big U-turn. It's saying therefore wages include past overtime, fees and compulsory payments in the regular payment that you make. You can claim 80% back.
Okay. What about benefits and salary sacrifice schemes then?
Okay, so the benefits and salary sacrifice schemes, again, there's been some updated guidance on this, and there is more clarity around this area. What the government have stated is that the reference salary, so the regular salary, shouldn't include the cost of non-monetary benefits provided to employees, including taxable benefits in kind. That's not saying that you can't pay your employees that, or you can't continue with those schemes. What it's saying is that you shouldn't include them in the grant that you're claiming through the government. Where the employer provides benefits to furloughed employees, these benefits should be in addition to the wages that must be paid under the terms of the job retention scheme. So you can continue to do so, but don't include it in your regular payments that you are claiming back. Normally, an employee wouldn't be able to switch freely out of a salary sacrifice scheme unless there was what's deemed as a life event. The HMRC have agreed that COVID-19 does count as a life event that could warrant a change to the arrangements. But again, if you're going to make any changes to these, you need to consult the contract of employment and you need to follow the necessary process and gain agreement in doing so.
Okay, cool. Any other updates?
Yes, and this is one that we didn't have clarity on for quite some time, and it was a question that we were asked on a number of occasions, which was working for a different employer, and it was pretty silent on this up until the most previous update. And we now have clarification that your employees are permitted to work for another employee whilst they are furloughed. It doesn't make any reference to hours. Whilst furloughed from an employer, your employee can go out and seek further employment. What it does say, though, is do refer to the contract of employment, because some contracts of employment do have specific reference to do not wish for you to be employed by somebody else. So you do need to consult the contract and have those discussions. Just as a process aside, if you do take on a new employee and that employee is furloughed elsewhere, there is a specific statement now in the new starter checklist to go to the HMRC around the furloughed employee.
Okay. Is there any further guidance around holidays?
Yeah, holidays is another area that we've spent a lot of time talking about, certainly with the bank holidays coming up over Easter. There wasn't an awful lot of clarity. However, what we now know is that the ACAS is quite clear that if you are a furloughed employee, then you can continue to take your holidays. But what you must do is you must pay any holidays at the 100% regular payment rate. You can still claim through the portal for the part of it, but they must be paid the full amount. The government employees guidance has been updated to say that it is possible to take annual leave whilst on furlough leave, and again it makes reference to employers must top up to 100% of normal pay. Now, it is still silent, the guidance on whether or not an employer can compel an employee to take annual leave. So again, that's something that we will be looking out for. But what I would say is, if at any time you do ask your employees to take holidays that they haven't previously booked, communicate, and you have to give them a certain amount of notice in which to do so.
Okay.
And then finally, employee rights. We've spoke about this previously. Employees have access to the same rights at work when they're furloughed, and that includes statutory sick pay, maternity and other parental rights, rights against unfair dismissal, and rights regarding redundancy payments. Now, one of the questions that we have been asked is, can grants be used to substitute redundancy payments? Now, the latest guidance from the government has confirmed that grants cannot be used to substitute redundancy payments, and they've put a caveat at the end of that that says HMRC will continue to monitor businesses after the scheme is closed. Okay. So they've made it quite clear that
so grants can't be used then to subsidise redundancy payments.
Redundancy payments, no, they can't.
Okay. When claims be made for employees on furlough leave, so when can they be made?
Yeah, so again, another question that we get asked quite a lot, and it's just to clarify if anybody else has the same question out there. The claim starts from the date that the employee finishes work and starts furlough. So we've been asked, is it from the date that they agree to the change in their contract, the amendment of the terms and conditions when they sign that letter? Is it when the letter's sent out, or is it when the decision's made? Now, the claims start from the date that the employee finished work. So when they no longer carried out any work on behalf of their employer.
Okay. So, cheers, yeah, that's kind
That's
of
okay. There's quite a few updates been going on.
Yeah, it changes all the time. What happens then after furlough? Employees return to work. We just crack on as normal, like you never know?
Yeah. So again, it's something we've been talking to clients about, because we do need to think about the future and what this might look like. And if you are in the position where you're bringing your teams back to work after a period of furlough leave, it's really important to recognise as employers that there's been a huge change, and the impact that this has had on you, your business and your employees. It's bound to have caused uncertainty. It will still be causing uncertainty and had an impact on yours, your employees' individual well-being. So it has been a period of unprecedented change for everybody, and as with any change, it's really important as a business or as a leader of your business that you look at how you can manage that the best way that you possibly can, because regardless, with whatever happens going forward, returning to work, you want to hit the ground running, have an engaged team that can really push your business forward to take it over the next 6 to 12 to 18 months in the best, most strong position you can.
Yeah, couldn't agree there. Communication is the key. Communication. Do you have any tips?
Okay, so
Sarah's tips.
My top tips for today regarding bringing your teams back to work. I mean, the biggest recommendation is that you communicate effectively. Again, communication, people can manage change. What they can't manage is the unknown. And good, solid communication is the basis for all employee relations. And you're in a situation at the moment, if you have teams that are furloughed, that you're not seeing them, you're not having team meetings with them necessarily, but it's really, really important to stay in touch, to check in, to talk to your teams about what's happening. So we'll start off with around communication. Be clear, be concise, and be as open and honest as you can. You may not have all the answers, and that's fine, but as long as you are talking to your teams and saying that you don't have all the answers, but answering fully and clearly where you can. Secondly, explain what's happening. Don't assume that people know. We're bombarded with information when we're still working. We're bombarded with information from our management teams. What we can't assume is that the people that are on furlough leave know what's happening, that they know how long this is going to last for. So explain what's happening, try and be, as I said, as clear and open and as concise as you can, and invite questions. Have a virtual open door policy. It's been a huge period of change for everybody. Ask your teams, ask your employees, is there anything they want to know? Maybe pull together a Q&A throughout this period. And when they come back to work, this is as important to continue. So when you're back in work, regularly check in, regularly ask if there's any questions, anything they want to know, anything they're unsure about or uncertain about. As I said, most people can manage the change and can work through that change curve. It's the unknown or not having the opportunity to communicate and ask those questions that causes concern. Again, when you go back to work, when you get your teams back in, gain their buy-in for where you're going, and if possible, try and involve them in any decisions that you're making. Pull focus groups together, ask them what their thoughts are, ask them for some input on how you move this forward. And again, I think what's really, really important is when people return to work that they know the value of why they're there. Because obviously if you're on furlough leave, there isn't any work for you at that time. So when you come back to work, set them clear targets, set them clear objectives so that they know they are playing a valuable part in the company. They know that they are there to help the business to achieve success. And then when they are achieving those targets and those objectives, recognise and reward their efforts, recognise the impact that they're having on your business, over communicate and check in regularly. So there are some top tips on how you can move your teams forward when they return to work.
Okay.
And what underpins Mark, for me massively is the key is strong leadership. Really, really important for strong leadership in any change, and certainly now in these times. Motivating and engaging your team will be crucial in getting people back on track and giving their discretional effort. It is going to be tough, and you may be in a situation where you've lost team members, where you've got people picking up the slack elsewhere, and we really, really need for teams to understand the part they're playing, to feel valued, to be engaged, and feel like they're a big part in moving the organisation forward. So as a senior leader, as an effective leader, give direction, review and plan to meet the overall targets, set clear targets. What are you going to focus on? What are you focusing your team's efforts on? Coach the team and share the plan, and constantly check the plan. Is this still relevant for where we're going? And then finally, be proactive in managing potential challenges. I know it's not the nicest visual phrase, but lance the boil. If you feel that things are building, if you feel that there's questions that are out there that are bubbling, that people are concerned about, face it head on, be proactive, ask them what they want to know, and just take that and move it forward. I think do a workforce plan what your return to work is going to look like, prepare for it, have clear goals and objectives, communicate effectively, and actively seek out questions, and just answer them as fully and honestly as you can. And I think giving thought to this when people are returning to work will support your teams, your business, and yourself in bringing people back.
Cheers, Sarah. So I think what we got out of that was communication's key, basically, and strong leadership in regards to having that
communication.
In regards to having that open door. So even if the questions do sound a bit silly, welcome them, get them in, talk to them, and just make sure you have a plan.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Mark.
Okay,
yeah,
because you can't just jump back into it. Okay, so great. We're going to move on now to what happens after furlough, and Karen's been sitting there quietly, just nodding her head as she goes along. Welcome, Karen.
Hello.
I shall be doing this now. You can mute me. Hooray.
I'm about to meet you now, Sarah. You sit back and drink your brew. Karen,
Hiya.
good to see you. So what happens after furlough then? And let's just say, for example, there isn't enough work out there. What do we do?
Okay. Well, for some select companies, it's been business as normal regarding COVID-19, apart from putting in place additional processes and procedures such as health and safety matters. However, for a large majority of businesses, it's not business as normal. Leads have been lost. Workloads have dropped, and just because the government has given some businesses a buffer for a couple of months by way of furlough payments over the next 12 months, how a business is going to be able to cover employees' wages if it's going to take 12 months to start building enough leads to sustain such an overhead? Who is going to cover the rental or mortgage payments if there's only limited monies coming into the business? And also, can the company sustain such big overheads whilst they try to rebuild and get back to normal or some form of normality? It's no secret that in the high majority of businesses, the biggest overhead is staff.
Yeah.
So, and that includes pensions, salaries, bonuses, car allowances, holiday pay, tax, national insurance payments. It's absolutely, the list is endless how much employees cost businesses. So what if you haven't got enough work for them? What if the company can't afford to keep these people on until business builds up? And how do you sustain keeping them on the payroll? This is going to be a massive one for businesses. So despite the best efforts of the government to keep people in paid employment with the 80% furlough payment and, during the COVID-19 crisis, at Wurkplace, we know, we work with a lot of business, a lot of SMEs, a lot of medium-sized businesses. We know that businesses are going to have to look at ways at making changes just to survive. And unfortunately, that includes staff. If you are one of those businesses who is going to have a look at cost cutting, it's likely that this will involve staff and salaries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through a few options available to businesses. If you do choose to go along any of these avenues that I'm going to quickly discuss now, then what I'd strongly advise is that you get professional advice and assistance through the process with a company such as Wurkplace. just to ensure that you don't end up putting your business at risk of an employment tribunal claim for something like unfair dismissal or disability discrimination, where instead of saving your money in the long term, it could end up being costly for your business if you do end up in an employment tribunal. One option is that's available to companies is to restructure their business, and we've been doing this already with some of our clients who are quite proactive. As a result of such restructuring, there may be a risk that some positions within the business are at risk of becoming redundant. And if this is the case, then the business must ensure that it follows a robust and fair redundancy process. Okay, so I can't make myself more clear than that. It has to be robust and it has to be fair. Other options available to businesses to avoid compulsory redundancies could include offering voluntary redundancy. Other options are companies could offer a layoff and short-time working, but only if the employee has such a clause within their contract of employment. Employers could also consult with employees where both parties agree to flexible working. You could look at temporarily reducing working hours for staff. You could look at reducing their pay or benefits, obviously making sure that you're still paying over the minimum wage. You can look at unpaid leave, perhaps. You could let go of temporary or contract workers. You could limit or stop overtime for staff, and just don't hire anyone else. That's another way to obviously to keep costs down. However, if you are considering any of these options as an alternative to redundancies, then I do reiterate, seek advice before you undertake any of these from a company such as Wurkplace to ensure you don't end up in an expensive employment tribunal. There are processes that you should follow when you are going through any of these recommendations that I've just made.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So you should really have policies on these things, to stick to policies as well. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Cool. So let's say, for an example, we've gone through, we've looked at the restructures, we've contacted Wurkplace, for example, we've done the restructuring thing, we've looked at short term, we've looked at unpaid leave, we've looked at layoffs, flexible working, we've cut down the overtime, and we come to the end of that road, and we're still not meeting the target that we need to meet to break even and so forth, or even to increase profit margins. So we're looking at redundancy. So what do we do if we find ourselves in redundancy? Redundancy is just unavoidable.
Oh, yeah.
What do you suggest?
Okay, well, if you do find that redundancies are unavoidable, the first thing you should look at internally is whether or not your company has a redundancy policy. So if you do have a redundancy policy, then that should be followed. However, if your company does not have a redundancy policy, then some of the things that you should consider are things like making a redundancy plan. So you need to plan it before you start anything at all. You need to consult with your employees. That is key. You must consult. You should take the decision and communicate how long the consultation is going to last. Right. Depending on how many employees you are making redundant, there are regulations that state that you must adhere to certain consultation periods of time before you make that decision. You should plan in what you're going to discuss within the consultation process. What are you going to discuss? How, what are you going to tell them? The reasons for the redundancy process taking place. You should also have a clear redundancy selection process. You should agree criteria with employees who may be affected as well. You should do that as you're going along the process. You should ensure that any employees that you select should be selected in a fair way. Again, you don't want to be going back to putting the business at risk if you can't show a fair selection process is taking place and not just your mate from around the corner. You've got to make sure that it's fair. You should also be setting up an appeal process. So should any of these employees appeal the process that you've undertaken when you've been going through the redundancy, then you should have this in place too. You should give employees a notice of any redundancy. And one other key thing is you should work out how much it's going to cost you as a business. Work out redundancy pay.
Yeah,
you need to work. Yeah, it's massive. Some companies can't afford it. You should work out the redundancy pay, notice pay. Things like any accrued holiday entitlement. These are all things that your company needs to factor in. As I say, when you're going through this process, how much is it going to cost? Now, if you can't afford to make redundancies, there is assistance available to companies. So it's not all doom and gloom. There is assistance, but as I say, you must go through all these processes that I've just gone through.
I've just collated there 11. There's 11 kind of points there in that redundancy plan alone. So that's a complete. Yeah. That's one webinar alone. So what I think we should do, Kat, based on the information you've just given us, I think we should host a separate webinar next Thursday, the 30th, at the same time, and go through the 11 steps of making people redundancy in full. I think that'll help a lot of people out if we could just break it all down and just talk us through it step by step, so that, you know, we're giving something back to the community so they can't afford someone like Wurkplace just yet. Then we're giving that little bit back to them. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree, and I can go into a lot more detail about, instead of just bullet points like I've just said, we can go into more detail about what you should be doing, what you should include within a redundancy plan. Yeah, that's fine, not a problem.
Super.
Yeah.
So to everyone listening, what I'll do is we'll set up a webinar after this for next Thursday. So if you just go onto the website or drop me an email, it'll all be out there in the same place that you found it this time. Thank you, Karen.
No problem.
Cheers. Let's go on to the last piece, which again is you. So finally, the last question to Karen is the cost of business. Now, what is the actual cost in the long term, do you think, to the business?
Oh, good question. Put me on the spot. Okay, the cost of COVID-19 to business in the UK, in my opinion, isn't just monetary. It's, you know, it's affecting employee and employers' mental health, you know, morale, long-term uncertainty as to whether or not businesses will be able to weather the storm, not just when furlough ends, but in the next 3, 6, 12, 24 months. You know, it's going to be a tough ride for all businesses to be able to get to where they want to be, or to be where they were when the COVID-19 hit. I mean, it was an economy that was already worrying about breaking free from Europe. So as I say, it's the cost of COVID-19 isn't just a monetary one. It's far greater than that, and it's, as I say, it's no one knows. It's uncertain. It's, you know, as I say, it's you know, it's uncertain, and it's far more than monetary.
Okay. Right, super. I'm going to unmute Sarah now. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Karen.
Hello.
Great for your participation, and again, your knowledge is amazing, so thanks for that. Guys, if you have any questions or queries, if you email me at the end of this, mark@wurkplace.co.uk, that's Wurkplace with a U, as you all know. I'll get back to you, and I'll get the guys to answer some of your questions. Thanks all for attending, and again, we're going to hold the redundancy one for next week, next Thursday, and then we're going to flick on to another one the week after. But redundancy, I think, is a huge one that we can try and prepare you for if you have to go down that road. Once again, thanks, Karen. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody at Wurkplace, and thanks everybody for attending. And I wish you all stay safe, stay well, and we'll catch you soon. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay, everybody. Bye.
Bye.